rail crossings into France. Well, to discuss that all further, we're now joined by Mr. Joe Quinn, who is the editor and researcher with Salt.net, and he's joining us live now via Skype from the French capital, Paris. Mr. Quinn, I wanted to start off with just getting your thoughts on the attack in Nice.
Well, this is a third mass terror attack on French soil against French citizens in the last 18 months. And I know people have fairly short memories, but this really goes back to 9/11, the 9/11 attacks, because that's when it all started, and people shouldn't forget that. Obviously, most people with any sense are aware that the 9/11 attacks had a lot more to do with the attempt to justify the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and it had a lot. There was a lot more than Al-Qaeda involved. We recently heard about Saudi Arabia possibly being involved, etc. And the close ties between the Saudi government and the Americans and the British, of course. So, I mean, there's a lot of big questions around this, the beginning of this idea of Islamic terrorism, which really started with 9/11, of course. And as I said, 9/11 was really an attempt by someone to justify or to provide justification for Western powers to invade Middle Eastern countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., and to wage this war on terrorism. So everything that happened since then, all terror attacks that happened since then, including the attack yesterday in Nice, have to be put in that context of Western powers seeking to demonize Muslims in order to justify Western intervention into Muslim countries. So, I mean, it has to be understood in that context, and there are many questions, obviously, around that. And we also have to remember that the Western powers like Tony Blair at the time, the Prime Minister of the UK, along with George Bush, lied to everyone, and I think most people are aware of this, lied to the whole world about the reasons for invading Iraq, which was based again on 9/11, or justified by 9/11. So when you have these people, these leaders of Western countries who have been lying to us about Middle Eastern or Muslim terror threat for so long, and provably they've been lying to us, no one doubts that, at least for in certain instances, then we have to question the continuing Western narrative about Muslim terrorism and what it's about. And it seems to be about, like I said, dividing the West from Muslims, and particularly in France. The reason why France seems to be being attacked in this way in particular is because France has the biggest Muslim population in Europe. So obviously there's a fracture point there that could be easily stuck between French Muslims and French Christians. And in fact, just recently, of the French intelligence, one of the French intelligence chiefs talked about the coming civil war in France. So these kind of terror attacks are very, very suspicious in the sense that, and I'm not saying that the guy last night who ran the truck into all those people and created that horrible deaths of so many people, I'm not saying that he was in any way, he wasn't acting on his own initiative, but you have to question, after 15 years of this demonization of Muslims around the world and the bombing of Muslim countries, you have to question who's really responsible when you consider Western policies towards Muslims and towards Muslim countries. I mean, this is not a black and white situation, as the government would like us to think, and like so many people to think, just take it as it's just terrorism and the government must protect you from it. This government hasn't protected anybody from terrorism. The Western governments in general haven't protected anybody from terrorism. They're either complicit in terrorism, which we've seen in the sense of the CIA arming groups like ISIS or giving weapons to ISIS in the Middle East, or they're completely incompetent to actually to protect anybody in Western countries. So whatever the case, these are hollow this is hollow rhetoric from people like the French president and other leaders of Western countries. It's derisable, and it's an insult to the victims.
I just wanted to throw one more dynamic into there, if I may, Mr. Quinn. It seems that France, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is playing good terrorists versus bad terrorists, because just a couple of days ago, literally, there was a conference in France of the MKO, a known terrorist organization, the Mujahideen al-Khalq organization, who has on its hands the blood of many innocent Iranians, in fact. And, there was a lot of fawning and heaping of praise on Maryam Rajavi, who is the terrorist leader of that organization. I'm wondering, how does that all play into this? As you've mentioned already, France's support for many such organizations around the world.
Right, well, these Western leaders have always, for many, many years, been just playing a game of geopolitics. They've been lying to the public when it suits them, as you just said, supporting one terrorist group over another, or even at times arming and supporting the terrorist groups that they claim to be fighting at the same time, as we've seen with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Iraq recently. So, I mean, this is the hypocrisy is staggering, and as I said, no one really should take any of it at face value. But of course, these kind of terror attacks that happened, like last night in Nice, tend to they're a blunt instrument that tend to shock the population and leave them open to receiving this kind of simplistic narrative, and they tend to forget the more complex dynamic behind it, and the fact that the hands of Western powers are extremely dirty in this whole situation, and ultimately people are going to have to make a decision about whether they're going to continue to allow themselves and their families and their friends to be killed in this way through this irresponsible and hypocritical government, or if they're going to do something about it.
Very well, we'll leave it there at that point. But of course, Mr. Quinn, we appreciate you taking our time out to speak to us here at Press TV. That was Joe Quinn, who was speaking to us live from Paris.